And BMW's family donation to Angela Merkel's party is stoking a massive lobbying row over in Germany. I don't think it's quite been heard so loud here, but German opposition parties on Tuesday accused Angela Merkel of pandering to the car lobby after her Conservatives, I think it's a Christian Democrat party, received major donations from the family that controls BMW, just as Berlin was lobbying against tougher EU caps on carbon emissions. They said the three donations made on October the 9th, totalling €700,000, have no connection to any political decisions. But the funds came days before European Union environment ministers backed German demands to scrap a deal to cap EU car emissions that Berlin had argued would cost jobs and damaged its premium automakers.
Well, I think you've summed it up nicely. So this is a very long-running story, actually, Tony, which has been playing out before the German election, clearly during it, and now after it as well. What's going on is that there are existing targets at the European level to make cars greener. By greener, I mean more fuel efficient. I mean, essentially, if you're cutting the carbon out of cars, what you're doing is making them run faster for less money. So it's in the consumer's interest. It's one of the reasons why the price of running a car is not going up as steeply as the price of petrol, because cars are getting more efficient and people are switching to more fuel efficient cars, and there's a massive incentive to do that, and it's generally a good news story. And it was regulation that by 2015 meant they had to cut the average emissions of cars to I think about 60 miles per gallon. That's about the average efficiency. It's been rumbling on for ages, and they were trying to work out what to do next. By 2020 the plan was that cars would be down, the average of any fleet would be down to about 40 miles per gallon across the whole of Europe. And the Germans essentially did not want to do this, because what Germans make, as anyone knows, they make Daimlers, Mercedes, BMW. They make big cars, not exclusively, right, but they make big cars. The average of all your fleet has to be at a particularly low carbon emissions. That means basically you can't sell those big cars unless those cars get massively more fuel efficient. Just under 1 million people in Germany work in the car industry. Apparently, I was reading in the FT, 1 out of every 7 university graduates goes to work in the car industry over there. Clearly, as you've just pointed out, there is a huge... the car industry has enormous political weight as a result. This donation is exceptionally fishy. I think even apart from this donation, it's clear which side the Chancellor's the German Chancellor's bread was buttered on. And there was all sorts of rumours about stuff going on when this was first discussed in Europe in June, about threats being made to countries like Hungary and Slovakia by the Germans that they would pull out their manufacturing plants, because of course a lot of the manufacturing doesn't happen in Germany. The companies may be German, but the manufacturing doesn't. Rumours of calls to David Cameron saying that Germany would support what Cameron wants to do with banking legislation, i.e. essentially bankers' bonuses and stopping caps on bankers' bonuses. Calls to the Irish Prime Minister, who was hosting the talks, to just say, "Come on, Enda, let's not be doing any of this nonsense." And to cut a very long story shorter than I already haven't, the deal. It was announced this week that a deal has been struck that this new tighter car efficiency standard won't happen. And as you say, it all seems to follow on very neatly from a campaign of lobbying before the German election and after it.
Well, I mean, the donations, this €700,000 donation to Merkel's party, came from Joanna Quandt, the widow of industrialist Herbert Quandt, who's credited with transforming BMW after World War II. But it's a very controversial family, because they made their money during World War II, this family, making batteries for the Nazi war effort and supplying them to aircraft, to submarines, to warships, etc., and also just transferred their money out of that firm, the battery firm, and bought up this private company, BMW. So you can't buy shares in BMW. It's a very private firm owned by this very private family. And also, when there was a commission set up to redistribute profits from World War II, after World War II, to victims of the Holocaust and victims of concentration camps, labour camps, and this kind of thing, BMW actually refused to contribute to it, even though the other companies who had been involved, for example Volkswagen, were manufacturing the V1 flying bombs, the old doodlebugs, this kind of thing. They all fessed up, put their hands in the air and said, well, we should contribute to that fund, not BMW. Martin, the power of the motor industry, it seems to be tied in, doesn't it, with the power of the oil industry around the world, and actually far more powerful in this case, it seems, here than governments.
Well, yes, I mean, that is true. And also I was reading this morning that scientists have now discovered that air pollution is in fact a major cause of cancer. and I think there's a general consensus emerging around this. So we're not, this isn't a trivial matter. We're actually, lung cancer is very definitely being caused by emissions. And if we're talking about saving energy, we should surely be making cars as efficient as we possibly can. I mean, that's what happened in the 70s with the first oil price shock. The Japanese and the Germans were much quicker on the uptake than everybody else, and they started to develop the modern-looking car, which actually goes, many more miles to the gallon than the gas guzzlers. I mean, it's so obvious. We used to talk about this as just never inevitably going to happen, and yet we've still got these huge, monstrous cars on the road. What are they doing there?
I mean, the advantage, of course, is, they use more fuel, and so the oil companies.
Well, exactly, and we all know what to. I mean, and if we're talking about reducing energy use, I mean that is ultimately the game we need to be getting into. I've just been reading this very interesting book about social development over the centuries and energy capture, and we're now each human being is now using far more energy than we were even 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and certainly more than we were 100 years ago. Now we can't go on down that road. We've got to start using less. That doesn't mean we have to make our lifestyle less satisfactory. We just have to get more efficient at using fossil. We will carry on using fossil fuels. I'm sure we will still be using coal in 200 years' time, but we won't be using very much of it.
Well, we were hooked on it while it was cheap, weren't we?